Hello everyone, my name is Carvel Dunn. I'll be presenting Bloom's Taxonomy for ED 506, History and Philosophy of Education. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to recall the 6 levels of Bloom's Taxonomy, explain the purpose and benefits of instructional objectives in the classroom, compare Bloom's original taxonomy with other instructional models, evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of Bloom's taxonomy, and apply Bloom's taxonomy by using the correct level and verbs to write instructional objectives in your own classroom. Before we discuss Bloom's taxonomy, we must first understand instructional objectives. Instructional objectives are statements written for students and that describe what they should be able to do at the end of a lesson or unit of study. Educators have been using instructional objectives for decades, and they continue to be an important part of education today. Objectives tell students exactly what is expected of them. Objectives are specific, observable, and measurable so that teachers can determine whether learning has actually taken place. Objectives can be written in 3 different domains: the cognitive, affective, or psychomotor. Although Bloom's taxonomy is the focus of this presentation, I think it's important to recognize that it is not the only instructional taxonomy. It is just the one that is most widely used. Let's look at some of the other taxonomies. First, let's look at the affective domain. The affective domain was developed in 1964 by David Carthwall. The taxonomy focuses on students' attitudes, values, and feelings. It consists of 5 levels: receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and characterizing. Next, the psychomotor domain was developed in 1972 by Elizabeth Simpson. The taxonomy focuses on physical skill development. It emphasizes movement, accuracy, integration, and coordination. It includes 7 levels of learning. Next, we'll look at the revised taxonomy, which was developed by Anderson and Carthwall in 2001. This version uses a 2-dimensional model with 4 levels of knowledge and 6 cognitive levels, creating 24 possible levels of learning. Finally, the new taxonomy, which was developed by Marzano and Kendall in 2006. Like the revised version, it also uses a 2-dimensional model, but it combines the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains. It has 6 levels with 3 domains of knowledge, resulting in 18 different possible levels of learning. These new taxonomies were created to improve on Bloom's taxonomy, but instead, they are very complicated and they're not widely used today. Now, let's look at some benefits of instructional objectives in the classroom. Objectives help teachers emphasize the most important concepts while reducing unnecessary materials. They simplify note-taking because students know what information is important. Objectives also help students organize and study more efficiently, since they have a better understanding of what will be on the test. Finally, objectives guide students throughout the lessons by making expectations clear from the very beginning. Instructional objectives contain 4 components. The first is condition. This describes the circumstances under which learning occurs. The second is the intended audience, which is always the student. The third is the action verb, which is one of the major focuses of Bloom's taxonomy because it identifies what students will actually do. And finally, the standard, which describes the level of performance. Now that we've discussed instructional objectives and briefly looked at the other taxonomies, let's focus on Bloom's taxonomy. So what exactly is Bloom's taxonomy? Bloom's taxonomy is an instructional taxonomy developed by Benjamin Bloom in 1956. Bloom was a famous American educational psychologist. His framework focuses on cognitive domain of learning, which deals with thinking and intellectual development. He identified 6 levels of learning that progress from simple recall to the more complex thinking skills. Before we dive into the 6 levels, it's important to remember that there are actually 2 versions of Bloom's taxonomy. This presentation will focus on the original version, but there is also the revised version which was mentioned earlier. The 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy are knowledge or remember, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. The 6 levels are often grouped together into 3 categories. The first 2 levels are sometimes grouped into one category known as the recall category. The third and fourth levels are grouped into one category known as the interpretation level. And the last 2 levels are sometimes referred to as the problem-solving level. According to Bloom, learning begins with the lowest level at the bottom of the taxonomy and moves up to the higher order thinking at the top. Now, let's take a look at each individual level. The first level is knowledge. This level focuses on recalling previously memorized facts. It also focuses on the student's ability to remember or reorganize information or ideas. Notice that there are verbs associated with each level. These are very important in Bloom's taxonomy because these verbs help teachers write objectives that align with each level. The verbs for the knowledge level include identify, recall, recognize, describe, name, state, select, and define. And I just want you to note that these are not an exhaustive list of the verbs. There are many more verbs available for each level. So you may be asking, what does this all mean? And how exactly do I use Bloom's taxonomy in my classroom? Well, I'm glad you asked. At the bottom of each of these slides, I have included a practical example from my own first grade arithmetic class. Each objective includes all 4 parts discussed earlier: condition, audience, verb, and standard. I'll be honest, I don't always include a standard when I write my own objectives for my class, but I have included it here so you can see the full picture and how it all comes together. My first example. Given the addition and subtraction flashcards, that's the condition, the students, that's the audience, will recall, that's the verb, basic addition and subtraction combinations by answering at least 18 out of 20 flashcards. That's the standard. And that's what you want your students to be able to do at the end of the lesson. Next, we'll look at the second level, which is comprehension. Although I think memorization is very important, but at this level, the students must also be able to move past memorization and understand the meaning behind the facts. They can explain ideas in their own words and interpret information. Verbs include draw, explain, illustrate, rephrase, translate, convert, interpret, and estimate. For example, using a food scale and 16 1-ounce bags of chips, the students will explain the difference between pounds and ounces as units of weights with 100% accuracy. Next, the third level of the taxonomy is application. This happens when students can use existing knowledge in new situations or concepts, or they can also apply rules, concepts, and procedures and use information to solve problems. The verbs include apply, employ, transfer, use, solve, construct, prepare, and demonstrate. Example, during a classroom store activity, the students will apply their knowledge of coins to determine the correct amount of money needed to make a purchase with 90% accuracy. Next, we are on to the fourth level, and the fourth level is analysis. At this level, students examine information more deeply by breaking concepts into parts and exploring relationship among these parts. Students may also classify, compare, or categorize concepts. The verbs in this level include analyze, categorize, compare, contrast, outline, diagram, distinguish, and examine. Okay, let's look at the example. Given two different measurement tools, a ruler and a pint container, the students will analyze which tool is most appropriate for measuring a given object and explain their reasoning by selecting the correct tool for at least 4 out of 5 objects. Level number 5 is the synthesis level. Students create new ideas by reorganizing what they already know in a new way, or they create new or original concepts based on previous ideas. The emphasis here is always on learner creativity. The verbs include combine, formulate, organize, produce, integrate, design, create, and reorganize. Here's another example. Following the review of the 10 addition family, the students will create their own math story problems using the given combinations by correctly writing 3 story problems. And we are on to the final level. The evaluation level is the final level, which is also the highest level. At this level, the students objectively judge the value of material according to specific criteria, and they also accept or reject things based on established standards. The verbs include appraise, argue, assess, judge, evaluate, validate, critique, and weigh. For example, after examining 4 different combinations, the students will evaluate which combination does not belong and explain why by correctly explaining all 4 combinations. Okay, now that we have looked at all 6 levels, let's look at some advantages and disadvantages of Bloom's taxonomy. First, I'll discuss the advantages. One of the greatest advantages is that it is simple and easy to understand, especially when compared to the revised and the new taxonomies. It's a great lesson planning tool because it helps teachers focus on important learning outcomes while reducing unnecessary content. It also encourages critical thinking as students move up from the lower level to the higher thinking levels. Finally, it helps students study more efficiently because objectives clearly communicate what they are expected to learn. Now let's look at the disadvantages. The first and obvious problem with Bloom's taxonomy, especially for us Christian teachers, is that it's a philosophy that is based on a secular worldview. It places man at the center of learning. As Christians, we know that all knowledge begins with the fear of God. Proverbs 1:7. Colossians 2:3 says that in Christ are hidden all treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Proverbs 2:6 states that the Lord loveth wisdom, and out of his mouth cometh understanding. These verses show that knowledge comes from God and God only. Next, Bloom only focuses on the cognitive domain. It says nothing about developing values, attitudes, or character. For the Christian educator, teaching values and attitudes should be viewed above cognitive learning, since our goal is to help students become more like Christ. Third, learning is not always linear. Students do not always move through these levels in order. And I'm sure you've all experienced this in your own classroom. For example, last year in my class, I had a student who could draw and create almost anything, but he struggled to memorize the basic facts. So we cannot always depend on the sequence because students learn differently. The final problem with Bloom's taxonomy is that the ultimate goal and the highest level is evaluation. If that is our ultimate goal as Christian teachers, we have missed our purpose. We'll have to answer to God for neglecting our calling. As Christians, our goal should be to lead students to a saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ and to develop the whole person for the glory of God. In summary, despite its limitations, I believe Bloom's taxonomy is still the best practical framework for everyday classroom use. It's simple and easy to apply when writing instructional objectives, creating lesson plans, and assessing students' learning. The limitations we spoke about can easily be addressed if we make sure we are integrating biblical principles and Christian character training into everything we teach. The ideal framework is to always keep the Bible as the foundation while incorporating Bloom's taxonomy to ensure we are developing the whole person. As Christian teachers, no secular framework can be our only tool. We can implement Bloom's taxonomy, but it is the Bible that is the foundation and authority for everything that happens in the classroom. Are we developing the mind of Christ in our students? Remember, as Christian teachers, this is our purpose and ultimate goal. Thank you. May God bless you all.